So how many times have you heard the term storied franchise? You've heard it a bunch. We talk about the Lakers in the NBA as a storied franchise. We talk about the Red Sox and the Yankees in Major League Baseball as a storied franchise. We talk about the Bears, and we talk about the Raiders and the Cowboys and the 49ers, the Packers as storied franchises. And what makes me laugh sometimes is that we call them storied because they have so much history. They have so many precedents that have been set. They have a winning tradition. The problem is a lot of these storied franchises at this point in time, all they have are stories because there's no winning that's being done currently. So you have to rely on that moniker storied franchise, even if it's not applicable to today's day and age. And I think that's where we lie with the Las Vegas Raiders. And, you know, the Raiders moved to Vegas in 2020. And the reason that people call them a storied franchise, they have 3 Super Bowl rings. They haven't won a Super Bowl since the 80s, though. Those 3 Super Bowls came in the 70s and the 80s. The Raiders haven't won a playoff game since 2002. That was the year they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl, and they haven't been to the playoffs since 2021. And I think there are a lot of reasons why. There are a lot of reasons why the Vegas Raiders, whether they've been in Oakland, whether they've been in L.A. or Oakland again or now in Vegas, their fan base is always phenomenal. Their fan base is always a traveling fan base. Their fan base is always a very energetic fan base. Their fan base is always a loyal fan base. And I think that means something in the NFL. I think it means something when you can go to any town and see Raider fans. They're very transient. It doesn't matter where you are. The Raiders fans travel, and they're supplanted everywhere. And I think that's great for the NFL. I think that's great for this franchise. But what I don't think is great is the steps they've taken in the past. Because even when I think back to 2021 when they made the playoffs, the whole situation with John Gruden, and I talked about this before with a lot of other teams in terms of, I talked about the Falcons last week in terms of a turning point in an organization. The Raiders hired John Gruden, and I think it was a smart football hire, but then everybody understands what came out with those emails and all of the slurs and things of that nature that he was accused of and found to be guilty of portraying, which made him resign in 2021. And Rich Bisaccia took over that year, and they actually made the playoffs, but then decided that they didn't want to bring in Rich Bisaccia. They didn't want to bring him back, even though he was an interim, even though players loved him. They wanted to go in a different direction, and that direction was Josh McDaniels. And the funny thing about it is Josh McDaniels was always the direction that teams wanted to go in, even though he never proved himself to be a very good head coach. One of the best offensive coordinators probably in the history of football, and is a lifetime offensive coordinator in my mind. And that's cool if that's what it's going to be. But those are the decisions that the Raiders made. And because the Raiders made those decisions, it then prompted them to go after a guy like Antonio Pierce, who's a former player, also entering with the Raiders, and that didn't work out. And then they tried to go with Pete Carroll. They tried to go with the established guy like they did with John Gruden, but Pete Carroll was different than everybody else. Won a Super Bowl, won a national championship at USC, was very energetic even though he was older. And they say we're trying to bring experience and we're trying to bring a tradition of winning and a culture of winning here. And I don't think it was a bad idea, guys. It just didn't work out. Now, I do think Vegas did a very good job of cutting their ties with Pete Carroll. Now, if he were 30, 40, or 50-something, I would have said probably give him some time to build. But Pete Carroll's in, his 70s, something like that. He's not going to be around long. And they were trying to get him to be their transition coach, kind of like they brought in Kirk Cousins to be their transition and bridge quarterback. But they had to cut losses. It didn't work, and I don't have a problem with them doing that. So fast forward to this day and age. What are we looking at with Vegas? We're looking at Clint Kubiak, who is a Super Bowl winning coach as an offensive coordinator with the Seattle Seahawks. Then you brought in Kirk Cousins to be your starter, presumably just to pave the way for Fernando Mendoza. And I think a lot of that hinges on what happens moving forward. I'm going to get there. But that's kind of the decision-making they've made. And I made this a comparison to a lot of different teams. And I've said this. I said a lot of teams, in my estimation, fail when they're structuring a team, when they're structuring how to build their organization, because they go and get the quarterback, which is presumably and arguably the most important position on the field, which everybody says, but yet they don't do anything around the quarterback prior to his arrival. It's just like having a baby. If you plan on having a child, don't you think you need to get the crib? Don't you think you need to get the clothes? Don't you think you need to get the diapers? Get everything that the baby needs prior to him or her getting here, so then when they get here, they're prepared. But most teams don't do that. They want to go ahead and get the quarterback. Let me snatch him up right quick, and then let me try to build around him afterwards. Well, now you've wasted a season or 2 or 3 without putting the proper weapons around him, and now you're wondering why the quarterback's not developing because there's an organizational dysfunction at hand. I think the Raiders actually have done a good job in a lot of different ways by doing that. They went out and got Brock Bowers 2 years ago. They went out and got Ashton Jeanty last year. But I think the biggest thing that they went out and got for this young quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, was they went out and got an owner named Tom Brady. Tom Brady has nothing to do with football in Vegas, but has everything to do with football. He is actively mentoring Fernando Mendoza. And here's where I think a lot of the conventional wisdom is changing in the NFL. Remember, people are playing a lot later now because of the way players are protected, because of the rules, but also the way that players protect their bodies. So Tom Brady was 22 years old when he made his first start in the NFL, when he got drafted, excuse me. Fernando Mendoza was 22 years old. Brady was a sixth-round pick, although Mendoza is the first overall pick this year. Brady understands how to win at a high level, and that's what he's trying to put into Fernando Mendoza from a mindset standpoint. And I think the professional profile that Fernando Mendoza has is what Vegas needs. I think they need a quarterback who can not only play the game, but that can be a professional, because I think professional would be one of the last superlatives that you use for the Raiders. Nowadays, guys, there's nothing wrong with having an older quarterback if they're playing later on. A lot of people wanted to knock Michael Penix Jr. because he was, 23 or 24. People wanted to knock Bo Nix because he wasn't 19 or 20 years old. He played 4 years in college. Those are the quarterbacks that you want now because they're more experienced. And if the longevity of quarterbacks is increasing, why not have them start their careers at 22 or 23 years old if they're playing at 36, 37? That's still giving you almost 2 decades of quarterback play if you get the right quarterback. So I think everybody understands that players and their careers are being lengthened and longing, even especially at the quarterback spot. So why are you so quick to try to get a young quarterback who has minimal experience in college and trying to turn him into a pro when he doesn't have the experience, nor have you given him the runway to grow? I think Vegas, in that regard, is doing the right thing. I think they've got a long way to go. Again, they haven't won a Super Bowl since the 80s. They haven't been to the playoffs since 2021. They haven't won a playoff game in over 20 years. But building blocks are what it takes. So this is not a good organization now, but I want to see if they're taking steps to become a stable one.